Hello there and welcome. I'm Ole Brøgger, and if you're new here, I really hope I will earn your subscription today because we are going to build something big. I have got this idea that I want to build a boat, but just not any boat. I will build a boat that is so big that it's actually playable with multiple levels. I also had this idea how it's going to look. I made this kind of childish mock-up in paint just to get a feeling of how what parts I'm going to use and where, but nothing on the measurement. The only measurement I have is the size of this will be about 24-25 inches long and about 7 or 8 inches wide. Yeah, it's gonna be a big boat. So why don't we just get started? First, we're going to cut up some pieces of foam for the levels and decks of the boat. I will rarely use direct measurements because I like to eyeball things and just sculpt the whole build, but in this case I will use some sort of measurements. We have 3 decks and some of them is a bit wider than the others because I want some roundness to the boat. And here we can see the bow, and again I'm just eyeballing the size of it. I will need some sort of control when cutting, so I will put some needles through the foam so all 3 decks will get the same shape. And then we can do the bow cut. I put on some more lines just to make sure that it was symmetric. It was a bit difficult to follow the right line, but I managed to do it. To make it a bit smoother, I used some sandpaper. I offsetted the 3 bow pieces, and here you can see the middle one is a bit wider than the others, just to make this round shape. The foam boards were not long enough, so to extend the boat, I used these barbecue sticks and put some sheets together. And this will be the full length of the boat. To get an angle on the stern of the boat, I put my Proxon wire in a 30-degree angle, and then I could cut all the decks evenly. I also cut 2 more pieces for the front and back castle of the boat. We're also gonna need some masts for this boat, and here I have some 10mm dowels I'm going to use for that purpose. We will get back to those later. The ship will also need some cargo bay doors, and here I'll cut up 2 holes between each of the masts. Right now I'm just brainstorming a bit. I will just mark up some ideas where things are going to be, so I have a visual guideline for how it's going to be, but it's not going to be on measurement. Usually at this time I make bricks, but now we're going to make planks, and we're gonna need a lot of those. The army painted foam board is 10mm high, and I will make the planks 5mm wide. The glue gun is my new favorite tool. And now it's time to put on some planks on this boat. When the foam is this thin, it's pretty easy to sculpt and bend it without it breaking. The boat will also need some rooms. And in the deepest dark of the boat, we are going to build a prison or maybe a treasure chamber. To smooth the outside of the boat, I will use some sandpaper. Just to get a feeling about how big boats are going to be, I stacked up some pieces of foam to just get a feeling of the size. But now we just need to get some more planks. The boat will also need some doors, and here I used my laser cutter just to cut some pieces out for that purpose. Also made some jail doors. We need to be able to open and close the doors, and for that I made some hinges out of cardboard and superglued them into the frame. I'll use some PVA glue to glue in the doors because superglue is not very foam friendly. It will actually melt it. And I think the glue gun will just dry up too fast before I can manipulate it into the place. All the doors are in place on the lower deck with some help from some support sticks. Now we just have to wait for the glue to dry up. We also need some stairs between the decks, and here my laser cutter became handy again. I used super glue and activator to put the parts together. And then it was time to measure up where the parts are going to be. And this is where my mock-up from earlier were very handy. I used some hot glue to put in the stairs. I used some sandpaper to smooth everything out, and to make all the wood grains I used steel brush all over the planks. The lowest deck is done with doors and stairs and walls. Now it's time to build up the second deck with guns and anchors. I 3D printed some guns from the Loot Studio Ship Ahoy pack. And here I started to build up the gun deck with more planks, holes for the guns, stairs, and another room with some windows I used in a previous project. And again, I used my steel brush to make some more wood grains. Since the gun deck has no walls or rooms, I used some foam to make some support planks. And here the mast will also come in handy for support. I'll have to make some fake mast because the deck has to come apart. For the bow of the ship, we also need this figurehead. I 3D printed it from the Loot Studio's Ship Ahoy pack. It needed a couple of modifications, so I used my rotary tool and I put in a dowel as the bowsprit. On the top deck, we'll need a front castle and a rear castle. In the front castle, we need a lot of stuff. Stairs, doors, a couple of windows, and I will split it in 2 rooms. We also need a hatch with some stairs to the lower deck. I also started to build the railing for the top deck, but it was soon to come off again because I got a new idea. Yes, you guessed right, laser cutting. This is for the railings all over on the top deck, front castle and back castle. Let's rip this foam off. I used hot glue to attach the bottom part of the railing, and then I used super glue to attach the top part. And of course some activator. All the railing for the top deck is done, and now it's for the top of the back castle where the helm is going to be. Here I have some corner pieces, and I 3D printed some harpies that's going to be attached to that. I used my glue gun to attach all the pieces. I also 3D printed these torches and put them on the corners on the front. And same procedure for the front castle of the ship. I cut some 2mm very thin pieces of foam to use them as trim for all the parts that come apart. It's Mod Podge time. This is just Mod Podge mixed up with black paint and a tiny drop of water. I use this in all my foam projects to bind everything together and make a very good priming surface. Mod Podge is not toxic or anything, but I still use gloves just not to mess up my hands too much. I will only put Mod Podge on the foam and try to avoid all the wooden surfaces. Mod Podge is done, and now we just have to let it sit and dry. I used this primer from Army Painter Dungeon and Subterrane because I think it has a nice color. It's not quite black and it has a green tone to it. Just a tiny update here. We are 3 weeks into the project and I primed and painted all these parts yesterday. As you can see, I had an attempt opening the door and they fell off. I made the tough decision that I will going to recut a lot of these doors and then I'm gonna reattach them to the ship. I'm just gonna stain it. They will look more like wood. The only exception for this is the jail doors here. And we're going to need to make some flooring. I'm going to use these coffee stir sticks and it's a ton of work, so let's get on with it. Yes, all the doors has to come out, and with a sharp knife it was pretty easy. It's time to give this ship some color. I use this craft paint and it's just a chocolate brown. I dry brush it on with a very big brush all over the ship. To make it look like wood, I use this Vallejo Israeli sand as a highlight and I dry brushed that on as well. It starts to look like a ship, but we still have a ton of work in front of us. For the figurehead and the harpies, I use this dark wood speed paint from the Army Painter. I use a glue gun to put in the harpies. And the same thing with the figurehead. The floor of all the decks will be coffee stir sticks as floor planks. I'll use some PVA glue, spread it out with a brush, and then I will cut all the floor planks to size. Yeah, the jail doors, they were in the way, so they had to go. It took many hours to put in all these floors all over the 3 decks and the front and back castle. So while I was doing this routine job, I listened to my favorite D&D podcast, Venture Forth. Links are in the description below. I've laser cut some new doors, but as a new step, I wanted to paint the doors before I was attaching the hinges. And the jail doors were getting some rough iron from the army painter, and then I dry brushed it with some Necron silver from Games Workshop. And here's the same procedure with cardboard, superglue and activator for hinges. I used PVA glue to attach the doors to the boat. To speed up the process of painting all the doors, I decided to use my airbrush and the army painter's speed paint LiQWYD. I actually liked the effect that it turned out to have, because you could still see the wood grains in the doors. I also wanted something that looked like more door handles. So I drilled a couple of holes and attached a couple of grommets, I think they're called grommets, on the door, and I think it turned out perfect. And then the same procedure, door hinges, cardboard, superglue, activator. I've also laser cut some doors for the cargo bays, and I will attach them the same way with cardboard, superglue and activator. I used the army painter LiQWYD for the edge around the door to the cargo bay, and the doors for the cargo bay will also get the same treatment. I also laser cut some doors for the gun ports. I attached these to some barbecue sticks with some superglue. Then I also needed some trim around the openings for the gun ports, and for that I used some cut up coffee stir sticks. And again, for the cargo bay doors and the gun ports, I used my airbrush to give this a wooden effect with the same LiQWYD color from the army painter. I did the gun port trim with a brush. And more wooden panels and planks for the top deck. We also need to attach the helm. I 3D printed this helm piece from the Ship Ahoy package from LiQWYD Studios. I also laser cut this little hatch for the front castle stairs to the gun deck. To bring out the real wooden grains in the coffee stir sticks that are planks on the ship, I used this brown stain, which is alcohol based. I got this from a local hobby store, and I really love the effect. I actually used the same stuff on my Citygate castle. Since the stain is alcohol based, it's very thin, so the wood just sucks it up. For the mast, I cut out these parts to hold the yards, and I cut out some parts for a crow's nest. I used a thin super glue and some activator to put the parts together. The anchors is also 3D printed parts from the LiQWYD Studio pack Ship Ahoy, and I'm gonna attach those with some chain, some laser cut parts and super glue. But first the anchors need some paint. I used the Noble Skin from Army Painter, which is one of the new 2.0 speed paints. I also used the Desolate Brown for the seaweed and the Peachy Flesh for the barnacles. Then I dry brushed the barnacles with some matte white. I made the winches from some barbecue sticks and some laser cutted parts. I attached the chain to the anchor with a piece of metal wire. And I used some super glue to attach the winch to the deck. Both winches for the anchors are attached, and now I'll use the same LiQWYD speed paint from the Army Painter to give it some color. For the crow's nest, I laser cut these standoffs, and I'll just attach them with some super glue activator like all the rest of the wood. And I used the LiQWYD speed paint for all the masts. Since the mast can't go to the keel of the ship, I had to reinforce the top deck where I'm going to attach the masts. I cut out a tiny piece of coffee stir stick and embedded it into the foam underneath the hole for the mast. I put in some PVA glue and put in the coffee stir stick. When I was going to attach the mast from the other side, I needed to prevent the PVA glue from running out, and for that purpose I used this piece of label paper. Then it was just filling up the hole from the other side with some PVA glue and put in the masts. I used some metal wire to keep the masts in place while the glue was drying up. I have 3D printed some rope supports from the LiQWYD Studio pack Ship Ahoy, and I'm just gonna attach it with some super glue. And now for the hatches for the gun ports. I drilled some holes in the frames to put in some metal wire as hinges, and then I cut off each port separately. And now we have 5 independent gun ports. We also need something to identify the ship, so I printed out these flags. I'll just fold it around the flag post and put some PVA glue in it. I don't want too much rigging, but a wire here and there is okay. I tied up a nut, put some super glue on it, and then I painted the thread with some pale bone. I also made this jig so I could make a ladder for the crow's nest. We can't have a ship without sails, so I cut up some pieces of tablecloth and put some wire through it so I could just hang it on the masts. I wanted it to be removable so it won't get in the way for the gameplay. And one last thing, we can't have a ship without a name, and I decided to call this ship the Harpy. Yes, it is done, and I'm so excited about this build because it turned out way better than I actually thought. Yes, it is not a historical correct ship, and the proportions maybe not be correct and all that stuff, but this ship was built with the intent of playability. And for the first time, I didn't even stay within a grid. I think it gave me a lot of potential and freedom for modeling and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just so excited about how this turned out. But let me give you a tour inside. Thank you so much for watching this till the end. I really hope I earned your subscription to my channel. At least give my video a like. I really appreciate that. Thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.